Let's get started. So first of all, hello everyone. It's great to welcome you to this webinar on an introduction to therapeutic workplace communications. Dealing with mental health well-being at work can feel like a sensitive area, and many managers and team leaders often shy away from the topic entirely. Or they maybe will schedule a couple of wellness events a year and feel that might tick the box sufficiently. So it's wonderful to know that for those of you who are attending today, that this topic is of interest to you, particularly as we're in a time of global uncertainty and economic instability, when staff may feel increasingly stressed. So the fact that you're interested in embracing empathic approaches to your duty of care for your staff, which is something I have to say that AI can only generalize and cannot give a humanistic approach to, then it's great to have you here, and it's all the more important to think about how to introduce therapeutic communication. This session should be around an hour, and I've built in some time at the end for questions. Just to say, as this webinar structure is presentational, you'll have noticed that your cameras and microphones have been set to off. However, if you've got any questions, please do pop them in the chat throughout the session. As I'm hosting this as a one-person show, I'm hoping I'll be able to navigate the tech and I'll be able to respond to your questions at the end. For those who'd like to share any insights, or you'd want to ask your person verbally, I can unmute your microphone during that scheduled question time. Before we get started, I just wanted to preface that this session is a webinar taster class. So what I mean by that is it will give you an idea of the type of skill development that you can expect if you invest in therapeutic communication in the workplace. So what can you expect from today? It's, I guess, a mini masterclass, although my imposter syndrome will shudder at the word masterclass. But essentially, it's very much an introduction to the theory behind active listening and its implementation in the workplace. For some of you, the insights might feel familiar. For others, it might feel a little academic. What I'm hoping is that for all of you, that you will gain an understanding of how impactful therapeutic communication can be for mental well-being in the workplace. Today, I'm giving you some of the theory, and if you'd like to put this into action, then I can support you with leadership and HR skill development, as well as tailored interventions. And I'll talk a little bit more about my services at the end of the session. Also, please don't worry about taking any notes or any screenshots, as this webinar will be recorded, and I will share a link to that recording, which will be hosted on YouTube. And also, for everybody that's attending today, I'll share a reference document with a bit more of a deep dive into some of the stuff that we're going to talk about. So first of all, most important thing is to check in, of course, that you can hear me and that everyone can see the slides. So I'm just going to ask if you can give me a thumbs up from the Zoom reactions. If you can hear what I'm saying, you can see the slides. Yes, everyone can see, or you can drop that into the chat or use the reaction. Great. Okay. Also, throughout this webinar, because of the way it's structured, I do still want some interaction. So we're going to use those reaction emojis as responses to some of the insights. So if it's okay with everyone, I just want to do a quick test to see that you're all comfortable with the reactions that I'd like you to use. So you've done the thumbs up. So now, if you can, I'm not being narcissistic, but if you can give me the love heart reaction, so everyone's familiar where that is. Fabulous. And also well, I think Zoom calls it ta-da, but I refer to it as the kind of celebration reaction. So if you can give me that one. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to ask you to use these reactions to share your response to some of the insights that I'll be going through throughout this session. And just to say, I selected them, not really for their meaning, but just for their kind of visual difference. So it's easy for me to kind of spot where you've selected different answers. So firstly, I want to share a little bit of background about me. Um, After a long career in communications, having worked across the UK, the UAE, India, Africa, and the US, I qualified as a counselling and psychotherapy professional last year. Currently, I work in private practice as well as volunteer as a bereavement counsellor at a local hospice. What started as a passionate interest in lockdown turned into 4 years of study and a new career. In my work now, I feel honoured to sit opposite brave individuals who have taken the courageous step to explore their psychological vulnerabilities. I also work as a communications and engagement specialist, helping teams to identify the gap between how they see themselves and how their audiences perceive them. I can support on crafting audience-centric narratives that evoke insight and behaviour change and engage stakeholders with purpose and consistency. I've had over 25 years experience working in corporate communications and leading teams. It was actually in my leadership roles that I became increasingly aware of the duty of care that I held for my team's mental well-being in the workplace, as well as my own. This arose because of a lingering bitterness that I unearthed throughout my own therapy, which I kind of believe was linked to a fear of failure and that lovely imposter syndrome that had in part been triggered by having to leave a senior communications role earlier in my career, which I had moved abroad to undertake. In my last role, I was lucky enough to thrive in a highly supportive environment. And after being identified as in Enneagram 2, which is the helper, I had the chance to explore my draw towards supportive interpersonal communication. When my co-workers were struggling, I felt I was able to understand their unique perspectives and could support them from their eyes rather than mine. Today, my work sits at the intersection of psychology and communication. It is an approach that is grounded, reflective, and practical. I bring therapeutic insight into real-world organizational contexts, providing insight and practical application through hands-on workshops and tailored interventions. And I'll share a little bit more about my work at the end of this session. So first, to demonstrate what we mean by active listening, I'd like to start with a short exercise. When we're actively listening to someone, the most important aspect of what they are sharing is not the external factors, i.e. the things that are happening, but how they feel about it internally. We call this shifting from an external locus of evaluation to an internal one. Active listening is not simply hearing what someone is saying, it's also understanding how they feel. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about how I felt about certain events in my life, which I have just shared with you. Each question has one of three options. For A, please use the thumbs up emoji. For B, please use the love heart reaction. And for C, if you can use the celebration reaction. So let's start. Question 1. How did I feel about becoming a therapist? Did I feel nervous? Was I excited? Or did I feel privileged? If you think it's A, give me a thumbs up. If you think it's B, give me a love heart. And if you think it's C, give me the celebration emoji. Okay, so everybody is listening. Lots of celebration emojis. You are all right. Yes, it was privileged because what I said was that I felt honored to sit across from brave clients. So, next question. How did I feel about becoming a team leader? Was it responsible, powerful, or overwhelmed? Again, if you think it's A, it's the thumbs up. If you think it's B, give me a love heart. And if you think it's C, give me the celebration emoji. Well, it's absolutely fabulous to see. I have got a lot of very active listeners here because everyone's giving me the thumbs up, and you are right, it was responsible because I said I realized I had a duty of care for my team's well-being. Okay, question three. How did I feel about leaving my job due to stress? If you think it's A, give me a thumbs up, which was I felt angry. If you think it's B, give me a love heart, which is I felt scared. And if you think it's C, give me the celebration, which is that I felt worthless. Okay, we're getting a few celebrations and a few of the love heart emojis, which is that I felt scared. So you're all right because actually it's all three. I said I was bitter, feared failure, and had an imposter syndrome. So really that is I felt angry, scared, and worthless. And for question four, how did I feel about seeing my co-workers struggling? Was it A, that I felt sad, B, I felt compelled, or C, that I felt empathic? So the answer, if you think is A, it's the thumbs. If you think it's B, it's the love heart. And if you think it's C, then it is the celebration. There's a few love hearts here, mainly the celebration emoji, which you are correct. It is empathic because I said that I was able to understand my co-workers' unique perspectives through their eyes. So, what I wanted to highlight with this exercise is something that Winston Churchill said as he referred to an old proverb when he was discussing the necessity of wisdom, patience, and strategic silence over impulsive action, which is if speaking is silver, then listening is gold. Active listening is gold, but unfortunately, it remains a rare commodity in the workplace, which can be demonstrated by some top level global statistics. According to Gallup's State of the Workplace Global Data Summary 2025, 48% of employees feel burnout, while 41 report high daily stress. So would you be shocked if these numbers applied to your teams, which would be basically 1 in 2 employees feeling like they're on the brink of burnout? Second point, the Mental Health UK report came out this year and stated that 1 in 3 workers aren't comfortable talking to their managers about stress or their mental well-being, while other large studies in the US suggest the figure is over 40%. Globally, the estimate is at least half of all workers feel that speaking to their manager about stress would result in a negative outcome. Next point. The World Health Organization estimates that depression and anxiety cost the global economy approximately $1 trillion annually in lost productivity. Now, what I would say is that this figure is likely to be much higher now, as the landmark study was actually done pre-COVID, and the number of sick days taken due to mental health has increased globally over the last 6 years. And finally, Deloitte UK's 2024 Mental Health and Employers Report estimated that for every pound spent on interventions that support mental well-being in the workplace resulted in almost £5 return on investment in productivity and reduced staff turnover and sick days. So if you can use the reactions again, give me a thumbs up if these stats surprised you, or a love heart if you're not shocked by the numbers. Okay, so lots of love hearts. So people aren't shocked that these numbers exist and that there is an issue with global mental health in the workplace. So what these stats highlight is a lack of attention paid to therapeutically informed interpersonal communication in the workplace. If an employee doesn't feel heard, not only will interpersonal communication become strained, but also their trust in their employer their engagement with work, and their overall well-being will be impacted. Now, this isn't a staff problem, it's a management issue. But the good news is we can grow as managers by developing active listening skills and emotionally intelligent leadership, resulting in better communication and robust therapeutic interpersonal relationships at work. This investment not only develops your management skill set, but also results in psychological safety, mental well-being, and more effective teams without turning the workplace into a clinical setting. So, what exactly are active listening skills and how do we introduce them into the workplace? Listening might seem like one of the simplest things you can do. You just shut up and listen, right? But there's a difference between hearing someone speak and listening to what they are saying, as well as paying attention to what they're not saying. I'm going to run through the core principles of active listening by using a nifty little acronym that I created. So, A is for awareness of self, C is for congruence through transparency, T is for therapeutic knowledge, I is for interest in other, V is for valuing difference, and E is for empathy above all. So, starting with awareness of self. This is about being aware of what's going on for you throughout the interpersonal communication so you can identify what's your stuff, which is your reactions rather than your responses to the other person, and what is their stuff, i.e., what is their experiences and their emotions. Often, when we listen to people, we're unconsciously judging them by applying our own lens of evaluation based on ideas and perspectives that we've developed throughout our lives. If you think of this like a computer processor that's been pre-designed to use information in a certain way, what you need to do is notice when that programming activates and switch it off. To do that, we need to leave our ego at the door, which requires an awareness of who we are, what we believe, why we believe it, and then a realization that these personal factors are unique to our own perspective and therefore are not absolutes. Part of this exploration of self is to identify and understand our triggers so that we can be aware when transference occurs. Transference is when we project our own experiences onto another because they make us, whether consciously or unconsciously, react in a way that is attached to other interpersonal relationships or experiences in our lives. Now, we may also detect countertransference, which is when the other transfers onto us and we react by countertransferring, i.e., that we respond in a way that adopts the transferred emotional behavior from the other, and that therefore influences the way we think and our acted responses. So, to achieve this non-ego state, it's crucial to look after oneself and address mental well-being issues you may be facing in the workplace. Otherwise, if you have unprocessed issues, they may resurface as projections during interpersonal communication, and you will project your stress onto the other. So, now let's think about self-awareness in the context of a therapeutically informed communication with a staff member. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a sentence that could come from a staff member that has been shared in an interpersonal exchange with you as the active listener, and then I want you to pick a response that is based on the question that I will ask. There will be three options, A, B, or C. So again, if you think the answer is A, give it the thumbs up. If you think the answer is B, give it the love heart. And if you think the answer is C, then give it the celebration reaction. So the statement. I think sometimes management don't realize how much time gets wasted because of changing priorities. Which of the following responses seems to be driven by an ego state? Is it A, can you share a little bit more about why you feel this? B, is it time wasted or could there still be some value? Or is it C, why do you think priorities get changed? So which of these responses seems to be driven by the listener's ego state? Thumbs up for A, love heart for B, and celebration reaction for C. Okay, quite a few C's. So the answer is actually B. And the reason for that is because this question, is it time wasted or could there still be some value, is focused on a management perspective, wanting to put across that no work is time wasted and obviously there's still value. Now, it's not to say that this statement isn't true, but it is driven by the ego state of the listener. By asking a question such as, can you share more about how you feel? This is driving the genuine interest in the person. And why do you think priorities get changed? Is trying to understand why they think that this situation is happening. So they are not driven by an ego state. So, having a strong sense of self allows you to embrace the use of congruence through transparency. Now, what this means is essentially that it's turning up as your authentic self within the interpersonal communication at work. Congruence requires you to be present in the moment without putting on a facade, which will encourage the staff member to also be present and authentic. Of course, in the workplace, there are boundaries of professionalism and confidentiality, which I'll go into a bit more later. But within those parameters, being transparent and genuine is key. So, for interpersonal communication to be effective, you need to be sure that the staff member knows you are there to listen without judgment and while being transparent about the limits of your proficiency. And what I mean by that is that you tell them you're not a professional counselor and that if you think that anything that they share is beyond your remit or capabilities as a therapeutic listener, you'll maintain confidentiality, but you will refer them to other departments or external services. Being congruent also means aligning how you feel internally with what you express externally, which demonstrates to the staff member that it's okay to be real. An example would be if the person seems a bit angry, let's say, when you're talking to them and it's making you feel a bit uneasy, you might say something like, I'm sensing that this makes you angry, and I'm aware that it can be a difficult emotion to navigate, especially in a workplace setting. Being congruent when you're engaged in therapeutic communication is rooted in person-centered theory, as developed by Carl Rogers, who's an American psychologist and was one of the founders of humanistic psychotherapy. In this approach, the listener shares their feelings when appropriate if this helps to facilitate the other to process what is going on for them. So, putting it into practice, here's the sentence from the staff member. I don't really understand what you mean by that. Do you mean I'm being overly sensitive? Which of the following responses portrays congruence from the listener? Is it, if that's what it sounded, it wasn't intentional? It could seem like you are sensitive to this issue. Or, I felt you were agitated, but please tell me if I'm wrong. So if you think it's A, give me the thumbs up. If you think it's B, give me the love heart. And if you think it's C, give me the celebration. Yeah, lots of celebration there. So yes, you're right. The congruence is, I felt you were agitated, but please tell me if I'm wrong. Because what that does is it portrays to the staff member what you are feeling, but with the caveat that you might be wrong. And it allows them to then explore those feelings of agitation. In terms of saying if that's what it sounded, it wasn't intentional, could be empathic, but it isn't exploring the feelings that the staff member has explained. And by saying it could seem like you are sensitive to this issue, could be judgmental. So, for some of you, these ideas might not be new, but for others, it might feel quite unfamiliar. So, the best way to battle any imposter feelings is to build up your therapeutic knowledge. Now, this doesn't mean you need to become a qualified psychotherapist, but rather that you equip yourself with a deeper understanding of the fallibility of being human, which essentially is the universal inherent tendency of people, all people, to make mistakes, hold biases, have insecurities, misjudge situations, display irrationality, and get lost in their own perspectives. So, how can you achieve this? Well, you can do it by taking a short course on an introduction to therapeutic listening. which will give you the confidence to actively listening during interpersonal communications at work. Having said that, while gaining knowledge can build your confidence, what you don't know, don't pretend to know. You're not there to fix the other person, but rather to listen and to understand. So maintaining your boundaries as an active listener and not a qualified therapist are absolutely crucial. It's important to work within the boundaries of the communicational context. If you're in a formal review, then there will be a structure that you are following. And while you can engage in active listening skills in this setting, there also is possibly going to be specific task-orientated points that need to be communicated. If the interaction is a check-in, such as like a well-being conversation, then it's important to communicate that boundary. And if an issue arises that you feel is beyond your capabilities to address, that could be psychologically or it could be in relation to the staff member's job role, then expressing this openly and referring them is key. When using a referral, you may want to introduce some other resources when appropriate. And I would suggest gathering, some personal activity tools that you can have within your HR toolkit that support staff members to explore their experiences. One of the most important factors in gaining therapeutic knowledge is that it enables you to normalize the person's feelings by referring to basic psychoeducation, which then can reduce their feelings of isolation. Incorporating therapeutic communication into your staff handbook and HR protocols could be something you may consider if you don't already have training and resources in place. So let's look at being therapeutically informed in practice. Here's the sentence from the staff member. Every time we have an event, I think something is going to go drastically wrong and the anxiety is killing me. Which of the following responses is rooted in therapeutic knowledge rather than a desire to fix? So is it A, sometimes things go wrong, but you have the skills to manage this? B, catastrophizing can be common when you're feeling anxious? Or C, have you thought about introducing a checklist to your processes? So give me a thumbs up for A, a love heart for B, and a celebration for C. Great, lots of love hearts, which is correct. It is catastrophizing can be common when you're feeling anxious because this is normalizing the anxiety and the feeling of the person. Now, saying something like sometimes things go wrong, but you have the skills to manage this isn't necessarily a wrong statement, but it could apply pressure to the staff member by telling them, oh no, you're fine. And this is more solution based. So you want to normalize their feelings before you kind of get to solutions. Similarly with C, have you thought about introducing a checklist? Again, this is solution based. Doesn't mean that you don't want to talk about solutions, but they should be co-collaborated and should come after the feelings have been processed. A lot of time when we listen, we are subconsciously waiting to talk so we can be listened to. Conversely, active listening is driven by having an unwavering interest in the other, which means you engage in a genuine curiosity and your only focus is understanding their thoughts, their feelings, and their emotions. This requires that you listen with intent to understand the experience of the staff member from their own unique perspective, being aware when you are subconsciously applying your own lens and setting this aside. You're not trying to work out what is right or what's wrong, but instead you're striving to gain an understanding of how the other feels. Active listening uses clarifying opening questions to demonstrate interest. For example, if you feel comfortable, would you like to tell me a bit more about how this situation makes you feel? This type of language not only creates a safe space, but also results in the staff member feeling heard. This demonstration of genuine interest is the backbone of a core principle of therapeutic communication, which is to hold the other in unconditional positive regard, accepting them as a unique individual without criticism or judgment. Active listening is not about finding an immediate solution based on your assessment, but instead it's about acting as a facilitator for the other to discover the answers themselves, which means having a full acceptance of what they share as their truth. In this sense, the exchange between yourself as the active listener and the staff member as the sharer is underpinned by an approach that puts them in the driver's seat. So this can be expressed by doing verbal and non-verbal encouragers, such as nodding and Yes. However, what you don't want to do is fall into a forced or unnatural state where you're sort of focused and just going, yep, 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 because that might feel unnatural and also feel like you're sort of rushing the person. But also you can use mirroring where you repeat certain words, paraphrasing and reflecting the other's perspectives and emotions. So, what does displaying the focus on the other look like in practice? Here is the sentence from the member. If I try to talk to them about the way they're doing it, then they just say I'm having a go at them. What do you think I should do? Which of the following responses puts the staff member in the driver's seat? Is it A, what would it feel like to try to just share your experience? B, what if you wrote down in an email and then got someone to check it? Or C, can you try and adapt to the way that they are working? So give me the thumbs up for A, the love heart for B, and the celebration for C. Yeah, so you're correct. It is A. What would it feel like to try just sharing your experience? Essentially, what you're saying here is you've told me how you feel, i.e., that when you try to talk to them about the task that they're doing, they feel they're having a go at them. So how would it feel just to tell them that, which is putting them in the driver's seat and not being prescriptive? To achieve this genuine interest in and positive regard of the other, we must value difference, seeing it as a chance to learn. This requires a recognition that there is no one size that fits all when it comes to processing stress. Therefore, safeguarding well-being in the workplace must start with the individual. This means actively integrating the staff member's unique identity into the interpersonal exchange without making assumptions. For example, if an individual has disclosed a neurodiversity, be open to how they feel this impacts their locus of evaluation, but don't assume that this is an explanation for the issue that they have raised. Avoiding assumptions based on identity is crucial, and therefore it's important to also be aware of intersectionality. This is basically where the staff member holds overlapping identities, some which can be known and others which may not be. This also means recognizing and reflecting on our own unconscious bias and personal identity lens to avoid projecting our values onto the other. We may think we know something about the person's identity because we've encountered someone similar in our own lives. However, this thought process can become stereotyping, so it's important to acknowledge the other's experience as wholly unique to them. Equally, as much as it's important to be aware of our differences to the other and therefore consciously remove any initial stereotyping, we need to pay attention to what I call the red flag of familiarity. This occurs when the other seems familiar to you in terms of their identity and their experiences, and then you may assume that they will share the same perspective as you. Essentially, it's important to remember that you are not the expert in the staff member's experience, they are. So here's the statement from the staff member. Sometimes I think they assume I'm menopausal, and that is why I disagree, but that feels like I'm being typecast. Which of the following responses makes assumptions about the staff member's experience? Is it A, that's frustrating and maybe feels like something you have to put up with? B, is this something they have said to you, or are you assuming this? Or C, where do you think these feelings of stereotyping are coming from? So, which one makes assumptions about the staff member's experience? Give me a thumbs up for A, a love heart for B, and the celebration emoji for C. Yeah, lots of love hearts, which is correct. This statement, that's frustrating, and maybe feels like something you have to put up with, is an assumption. And it might be because it's something that you have experienced or that seems familiar to you. And that is not allowing the staff member to tell you how they feel. The other two questions, is this something they have said to you, or are you assuming this, is exploring whether this is something that the person has heard, or whether it's an internal script that they have created as their own evidence for the way they feel they're being treated. And the final response, where do you think these feelings of stereotyping are coming from, allows the staff member to explore why that they feel that others are assuming that they're menopausal because they're disagreeing. So, equally, as much as it's important to be aware of our differences, and being empathic is important above everything else. Ultimately, the characteristics of active listening that I have shared are all underpinned by empathy, which is essentially an understanding of the felt experience of the other rather than sympathy for their circumstances. This means it's not about feeling sorry for the other based on your own filter, but instead understanding how they feel about their experience. Part of a therapeutically informed exchange is the initial download, when the staff member wants to get their issue off their chest. It's important that you recognise their feelings as normal and understandable so that they can feel accepted, heard, and safe to share. To deliver empathic, effective, and authentic support, when the staff member shares their experience and feelings, it's important to put aside your own frame of reference and enter the role of a non judgmental listener. The moment you think what they're saying is wrong, or you feel yourself questioning their validity, you have entered a frame of judgment and the communication is no longer therapeutic. While we can gently challenge a perspective, we should only do this if it benefits the other rather than ourselves or the organisation. Now, this might sound counterproductive from a company level. However, therapeutic communication is personnel centred, while other human resources you have as part of your infrastructure may be organisationally driven. Both work together to protect your staff and your organisation. Similarly, therapeutic communication should involve standing by the side of the staff member without colluding with them, which can be done by offering gentle counter perspectives to negative self images. So, how do we embrace empathy in practice? Here's the sentence from the staff member. I've shared this before and nothing changes, so I feel like I just have to accept that this is the way things are. Which of the following responses gently counters this perspective while remaining empathic? Is it A, I realise you have shared before, but change isn't always straightforward? B, I appreciate your frustration. What change would you like to see? Or C, do you think that it's okay to not agree with absolutely every work process? So thumbs up for A, the love heart for B, and the celebration for C. Yeah, lots of love hearts, which is correct. The second response, I appreciate your frustration. What change would you like to see? Recognizes how they feel, but also counters their perspective by saying, well, what change would you want to see? Rather than just accepting there can be no change. I appreciate this is quite a lot of theory to absorb, and that for some of you, it may still feel a little jargonistic, which is why putting it into practice takes skills development, which I offer within my services as a therapeutic communications consultant. Therefore, it would be great to know which element of active listening did you find you were most familiar with. So in the chat, if you can put either A, awareness of self, C for congruence, T for therapeutic knowledge, I for valuing difference, V for, sorry, I for interest in other, V for valuing difference, and empathy above all. So which of those elements were you felt that you were most familiar with? If you can just drop them into the chat, just the letters. Okay, so we've got valuing difference, empathy, interest in other. And now, if you can tell me the ones that you were the most unfamiliar with. So if you drop those letters into the chat. So I can see Yeah, congruence. Yeah, another congruence. So that's probably the most unfamiliar. And then finally, if you can let me know which of these you feel has the potential to be the most challenging to implement within the workplace. So that would be in terms of how you would bring it in. Okay, yeah, awareness of self, which isn't surprising. I think it is one of the most difficult things is to be able to be aware of what is going on for you within an exchange. So, in summary, to promote mental well-being in the workplace, staff need to feel seen and heard. This requires an understanding and implementation of the core conditions of congruence, empathy, and unconditional positive regard, which is centered by active listening. Introducing a therapeutic framework for interpersonal communications into your HR documentation is a way of cementing an organizational commitment to mental well-being in the workplace. As we have covered the background theory of active listening, I'm only going to touch very briefly on implementation, focusing on environment and contracting, which are something that we cover in more detail in my workshops. So, firstly, on environment. While most staff meetings or reviews may take place within a formal setting, such as a manager's office or a meeting room, if a staff member has requested a mental well-being check-in, which in itself I would say is something you should make staff aware or available as part of your organisational structure, then you may want to ask them where they would like to have this conversation so that they feel comfortable from the outset. Now, some larger organisations have designated wellbeing rooms. However, a staff member may feel conscious about meeting in a space that is recognised for a particular type of exchange. Therefore, the space that they may feel most safe to share could actually be off-site. Ultimately, the space should be somewhere the staff member feels relaxed, so check in with them and suggest options. A confidential space that allows the staff member to share safely out of earshot of colleagues and within surroundings that allows for focus away from distractions. So if you have a busy cafe that's near your building, that might not be the best possible option. Also, in the time of remote working, and even if it's not in remote working, online is another option. Equally, establishing boundaries at the outset are key, which means being transparent about what the exchange is and also what it isn't. Explaining in a verbal contract what the boundaries are and why they're in place in terms of safeguarding. This should include being clear the conversation is confidential, but there are limits, such as if you are concerned about the safety of the individual or others. Sharing your limits of proficiency in terms of your therapeutic knowledge, and that if there's anything that is shared that you feel is beyond your capabilities to engage with, you'll discuss with the person the best course of action. And explaining clearly what the staff member can expect in the exchange. For example, that you're there to listen and to support with a view to collaborating on any further actions, but the session is not necessarily about finding an immediate solution. Right. I feel that, I can appreciate that this might be quite academic and you might want to learn more about how you practically introduce therapeutic communication to your workplace. So I quickly want to share some of the service that I offer as a therapeutic communications consultant. As much as every individual is unique, so is each organisation with its own values, workplace settings, which could be remote, in-house, could have multinational teams, different staff sizes and structures, things that are pressure points that are part of the business, and communication challenges. Therefore, I offer an interpersonal communications audit whereby I conduct discovery sessions with your leadership and staff to identify your current styles and approaches, from which I provide strategic recommendations based on your organization's specific infrastructure. Today's webinar has provided a very top-level overview of the theory behind active listening with a little bit about the logistics of implementation. And in my half-day introduction to therapeutic listening workshop, which can be done inline, online, or in person in your offices, I delve into more detail around how the core elements of active listening are activated in practice through scenarios and how to apply these to your unique organizational circumstances. I also run 6 lesson course for HR and leadership skill development, as well as staff introductions to therapeutic interpersonal communication, which is essentially focusing on your staff rather than your management to help them to move away from being reactive and to move into being responsive in interpersonal communication. To improve your staff's mental well-being and offer a supportive, therapeutically informed communication culture, there are tools that you can introduce to your human resources. I can work with your HR and leadership personnel to build a therapeutic framework for effective interpersonal relationships that is tailored to your organizational culture and strategic objectives, as well as develop staff user manuals that encourage empathic engagement. And finally, if you're looking to adopt robust working practices that promote mental well-being, you may consider introducing therapeutic check-ins with an external qualified professional. I offer one-off or periodic confidential and independent staff mental well-being check-ins, which can be conducted in person or online. I then synthesize these sessions into a trend report for your leadership development, which maintains staff confidentiality. So, as a psychotherapist, I am used to doing a lot more listening and a lot less talking. So, I would love to know if you have any thoughts, feelings, any questions. If you would like to share anything, please raise your hand. You can also type any questions into the chat, or any comments that are your biggest takeaway from the session, what you found the most surprising, and anything that you have learnt that you would like to put into action if you want to add to the chat. And I think there is a way that I can unmute people if they would like to share verbally. I appreciate it's quite a lot to cover in one sitting, and hopefully it'll give you a kind of a taster of what it means to bring empathic listening into the workplace. Yeah, question from Jane. This is an important skill for leaders, and with the increase of younger generations in the workplace, it's more important than ever that we become more comfortable with discussing mental health. I couldn't agree more. I recently wrote a piece on the difference between generational management styles. And at the moment, there are a lot of people from Gen Z and millennial generations that are being managed by people that are from Gen X or baby boomer. And there is a difference in approach in terms of communication skills. So, question, how do we explain the difference between listening therapeutic and just being respectful listeners? I'd say the key thing, I would assume that everybody that's joined today promotes being respectful in terms of communication in the workplace, and that is, to allow the other person to speak, to listen to what they're saying. The difference with that and say therapeutic listening is that in general conversations, it's a two-way street. When it comes to therapeutically listening, it's two distinct roles. So you've got the active listener and you've got the sharer. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not conversational, but it does mean that the priority for that session is for you to process and understand what the sharer is feeling, so that you can then work together to get to a solution. Unfortunately, a lot of time, if you bring a solution to somebody that is under stress, they will instantly get defensive. They're not ready to hear a solution. That solution might be workable and might be supportive to them, but unfortunately, if they have they're in a position of stress, then it can feel like no solution is workable. Any other questions? can therapeutic listening be triggered by the manager, or does it always have to be started by the employee? So if you see an employee struggling, can the manager start the process? So that's a really good question because ultimately, while we don't want to be leading, in a therapeutic sense, it's important that when somebody comes into therapy, that they are ready, that they have made the decision to come into therapy. If they haven't, then they will not be open to processing those feelings. But what I do think is important is signposting. So, not necessarily to say, do you want to have a wellbeing check-in? But if you've got resources, and that's always a good place to start, is signposting staff to those resources, whether that's in a staff handbook or whether that is particular tools that you have that the staff can use. And within those, you can reference the fact that one-to-one check-ins are available. So I think it's, there's ways in which that you can kind of trigger that kind of process without it feeling like you're telling the person that they ought to be having a well-being check-in. And I think also it's kind of part of the culture. Thoughts on the role of AI as a counseling tool? I think in terms of I would say that it can give you general general ideas, but what it cannot do is understand an individual person. So when you're building up your therapeutic knowledge, there is, you can use AI. However, there are also other really strong resources such as Psychology Today, the BACP, which will give you kind of, that are therapeutically informed and that are regulated. But I don't think that there is any negativity around using AI for a reference tool, but just keep in mind that every staff member is an individual. So really talking to them on an individual level. And the power in a therapeutic communication is the alliance between you and the other. So that, ultimately the sort of the processing happens because of the alliance, which is why it's really important that it's not always just what's being said, but it's the way in which you are listening. Um, where would we find the piece you wrote about different generational manager styles? It sounds interesting. That I was a LinkedIn post, so please do follow me on LinkedIn, and I will. I'm going to share some resources with everybody who joined the session today, and I will link some of my articles to there, so some of them may be of interest to you. What, sorry, another question from Jane. What's going on in the world today? How can we scale therapeutic listening to groups? We have many employees worried right now, but we can't stop to therapeutically listen to people individually. Yeah, so it's a really good point. I think, what we've really covered today is the skills of active listening in terms of a one-to-one setting. However, I think by encouraging a culture of sharing, you can do group sessions, which are driven by a well-being agenda. So it would be applying the same types of skills, but on a kind of group setting. So, and I would suggest in that scenario that you would do more kind of presentational prompts and things like that. And some people might not want to share in a group. So I think as long as after the group, you allow people to kind of share in different mediums, whether that's by email or whether that's, in an anonymous chat board or whether that's, personally with their manager. But you can certainly do group sessions. I'd also say that, if you have the budget to do so, bringing in, an external expert to run some of those, employee kind of employee well-being temperature check workshops, and being open about how people are feeling with uncertainty, maybe in their direct industry or within the world, can be really beneficial. Okay, so if there are no further questions, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for listening today. You obviously were, because there was some perfect kind of answers at the end there. And for my own ego state, if you want to leave the session with a reaction um, to how you're feeling right now at the end of the session, pick any emoji you would like. And also, please link in with me on LinkedIn. If you've got any questions, like I say, I'm going to be sharing a takeaway with you so you can email me directly. But also, if this is something that you're interested in developing within your organization, you can book a free consultation via my website where we can talk on more of an individual level about your specific context. So we're finishing just under the hour, and so I'm just going to say thank you to everybody again for joining, and keep listening and enjoy the rest of your day. And please do get in touch if you would like to have a further conversation. Thanks, everyone. Bye.